Hello, I'm Paddy Delaney and welcome to Integrated Infrastructure, a podcast dedicated to bringing you news and views from industry leaders involved in the development, design, construction and management of the many built forms that make up Australia's integrated infrastructure. This is episode 9 of Integrated Infrastructure, and this week I'm talking to Matthew Mackey, National Cost and Commercial Director from Arcadis. This week we talk a great deal about the opportunities and risks for Queensland coming out of COVID-19. We cover asset recycling, the potential for a double-dip recession, and where Matt sees tender prices heading in the next 12 months. We also talk about Matt's move to Australia 10 years ago and a career pivot that didn't quite work out. I hope you enjoy this episode. As always, please like, share, comment and subscribe if you do. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with Matthew. Matthew, welcome to Integrated Infrastructure. Thanks ever so much for coming on and joining us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Look, as you know, we're a short form podcast and we like to cut to the chase. So why don't you introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you work, what you do, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay. So my name's Matthew Mackey. I'm the National Director for the Cost and Commercial Management business, which is a business unit that sits within Arcadis Australia Pacific, which is obviously the Australia region of the wider global business. Been here now just over 3 years. Joined just 3 years ago to start the Cost and Commercial Management business in Australia. And the reason for that was that Arcadis have got a very, very large QS Cost and Commercial Management business globally, pushing about 4,000 QSs worldwide. And the business in Australia was really built around the old Hyder Consulting business, the legacy business there. And they wanted to deploy the same suite of services in Australia that we have elsewhere in the world, and there's a lot of dynamic and a lot of benefits to that. So I was approached and joined, just as I said, 3 years ago, just to start the Cost and Commercial Management business. And so since then, we've been growing quite steadily. Obviously, COVID-19 has kind of come and bit everybody in the arse a little bit, so it slowed us down, as I'm sure it slowed everybody down to a certain extent. But despite that, we're keeping our team relatively solid. We're obviously not looking at expanding in terms of growth this year. We're just trying to keep the footprint as it was in terms of the team that we have, which we've so far managed to do, and push on for and push on for next year. But prior to that, so I've been in Australia now 10 years. Moved over here August 2010, so just over 10 years now. Just celebrated the decade. Which means thanks. It must mean that I'm here to stay now. I mean, we've just converted one of our rooms in our house to a media room, so we must be here for the long haul. Prior to that, prior to moving out here, I was actually with Arcadis in the UK. That's where the whole, as I like to refer to it, as coming back home into the Arcadis business after a brief hiatus at a number of other businesses in Australia.
Fantastic. And you're you've obviously got your role with Arcadis, but you're very active in the Brisbane market as well. You've got a group that you created and very active in that sense, aren't you?
Yeah, and that group's called Property Leaders Brisbane, which is a local networking group. And part of the reason, that's been going for 6-7 years now, and we've got a very active committee. Part of the reason I kind of set that up was when I was moving over here from the UK. I'd been living and working in the UK for 10 years and had a very, very strong network where I was giving work out to people in my network. Work was coming back to me. And so when you look back on that kind of thing, you realise how easy life was to a certain extent, prior to the GFC and all that kind of thing, how easy it was to kind of generate work and generate interest in the market. And then when I was moving my family over here and I was thinking about the industry I was moving into, I realised I wouldn't know anybody over here at all. And I thought, well, there's two ways of developing a network. You can either generate it through delivering projects, which could be 5-10 years, as I found in the UK, to build that network through trust and delivery, and actually delivering the services. Or you can, as well as that, you can also do something else and try and do something else in the industry and give back to the industry to a certain extent as well. And that's where the ideas of, it's gone through a couple of different name changes over the years, but that's where the idea of Property Leaders Brisbane was first kind of born, in terms of creating that opportunity to do informal networking, free events and develop a network like that. And that's certainly what's allowed me to develop a reasonably strong presence in Queensland, just by doing something more than just the day-to-day job.
Yeah, brilliant. Being active, and you, I mean, crikey, your experience at the moment is very different to other places in the country, in that you're back into actually having meetings and catching up with people already, aren't you?
Yeah, so we had a kind of first. There's one event that we do called the First Thursday Club, which you just drinks on a Thursday at Riverland down on Eagle Street in Brisbane, and we had our first one back since February, I think it was, and that was a bit interesting. Well, funnily enough, I didn't actually get to go because I was actually full of the cold, and I didn't want to go and give everybody the COVID scares.
Yeah.
But I heard it was interesting because of the restrictions. You weren't allowed to stand at the bar. You could order your drink. You had to sit down. So trying to do a networking event where everybody sat down at chairs, I think would have created an interesting dynamic. But we're just trying different things now to put it back, because we've got a poll going at the moment of what do people want. They want virtual events. Do they want it online? Do they want face-to-face? What are people looking for? And so far, it's like the majority of people are all saying they're looking forward to face-to-face and trying to get back out into the market. So that's what we're going to try and provide for as long as restrictions allow us to.
Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. You know, and I know I sort of explained it on the podcast before, but really one of the, and sort of it hits on your point there in terms of giving something back, and the whole point of Integrated Infrastructure podcast is to try and give something back to the candidates and the clients that we work with. A lot of people at the moment are struggling because of COVID, whether that's within their work, because it's not easy to go out and win new work, and the work that people are winning, they're not, it's all very tight at the moment. And then there's people sitting at home probably struggling because of their careers as well. Is there a time sort of in your career where you've been at a crossroads or had to make some tough decisions, change direction, that would relate well maybe to people's experiences at the moment?
Yeah, a couple. So one of them is probably not a dissimilar dynamic to what we're experiencing now with COVID. Was that I was in the UK in the GFC, and I worked in that environment for 2.5 years, and it was, in retrospect, comparing it to where we are now, it was awful. I mean, COVID-19 is no picnic, don't get me wrong, but GFC in Manchester was pretty brutal at the time. We went from an office of about 26, 27 people down to about 10 or 11, and most of them were senior people. It was just, we got to the point where we were still developing clients, bringing in revenue, but had significantly less people to actually deliver it, and we couldn't recruit. We were letting people go across the business, as were a lot of businesses in that time. So it was kind of like blood on the walls kind of environment. So, and that's the one thing that triggered my move out here. 2.5 years of that, and I thought it's going to be 5 more years potentially before we get out of this, and I think it ended up being about 3 or 4. But we took that opportunity to actually move out to Australia. And I moved out to Queensland, moved here because young family, young kids, wanted the lifestyle, wanted the outdoors lifestyle that the people advocate here, and got all that in spades. What I hadn't appreciated is how different the market is here. A colleague of mine he won't appreciate me calling him a grumpy Scotsman, but he is a grumpy Scotsman. He asked me the other day. He's been here 20 odd years, 23 years, and he asked me a few weeks ago. He said, "When did you come over here again, Matt?" I said, 2010. And he said, "Oh, so you've never seen the good times in Brisbane?" That's how long it's been since there was a peak in Brisbane in terms of construction. Yeah. And I realised he's probably right. And that kind of led to my second issue, if you like, that I was working for a consultancy, pretty big consultancy in Brisbane, felt pretty directionless, felt like I wasn't getting where I needed to get to quickly, and some of that would have been market-led as well, but certainly didn't feel like I was being rewarded or valued. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to do something different. And I went working for a tier 1 contractor. And after 6 weeks, we both parted ways, and I went back to So I thought I'd do something different, having never worked contractor side before. And it is a different beast, and you're either equipped to do it or you're not. And I'm not saying I wasn't equipped to do it; it just wasn't the environment for me. So the lesson I learned from that is sometimes just bide your time. Don't jump at the first thing that comes along. Because I remember thinking at the time that how different it felt and how it didn't feel right, me making that kind of move. But I thought it's just because it's new. It's just because you've never worked contracting side. You're going to be nervous. it'll be fine. You'll work your way through it like you work for everything else. You can get through the GFC, you can get through anything kind of attitude. And yeah, how wrong was I? Sometimes that feeling of trepidation is there for a reason. And yeah, you should listen to it. So occasionally you should listen to it.
Follow your gut.
Yeah. Follow your gut to a certain extent. Yeah, which I ignored completely.
No, that's brilliant. That's two real nuggets there of a sort of experience. Thanks for sharing those. That's great. You're working hard to sort of try and help your clients with information at the moment. And I think we talked about this before, haven't we? As I called it, the second greatest literary accomplishment, called Great Expectations. But no, it really is, isn't it? You put a lot of work into this, and this is about where you see the market now and where you see it going in the future. And I'd love to hear your insights, from this and what your sort of key takeaways are. It'd be great though if maybe putting it into context of where you thought we were going pre-COVID, and then talk about sort of where you see us now, and then let's talk about the future as well.
Yeah, well, I was listening to a couple of other podcasts, and you'll probably find that there's some similarities in this. Is that not every really, in terms of the people who are talking about the market and where they see things going versus where it was, nobody's got any real clue. And I'll openly admit that we've changed our view and our forecast of where the market's going probably 2 or 3 times in the last 6 months. There was a piece of research that we do every year that came out in February or beginning of March, just as the kind of COVID lockdown in Australia was happening. And this report had been drafted over 6 months, and for Australia, we kind of redrafted it right at the end to try and capture where we thought COVID was going to go. You look at that report now, and then you look at what I've drafted in that Great Expectations paper, and you'll see the dynamic has shifted a little bit, just in terms of how long we thought that we were going to be into this. I think back in March, everyone was fingers crossed, we're going to be in this couple of months and then we'll be at the other side. But we're now in August, and Melbourne's in its second wave. Sydney's numbers are kind of bubbling a little bit. Queensland have got off relatively scot-free at this moment in time, but how long that lasts for, whether that will endure, is a different thing altogether. So dynamics are changing almost on a weekly basis. So trying to keep track of that is really, really difficult, which is why I've done a paper like that, on the basis that we need to try and keep in front of it to a certain extent. And one of the things we talk about there is, what could the recovery look like? What kind of shape would the recovery look like? And there are a number of different scenarios. And those scenarios, I'm almost getting to the point now that it's a different scenario in each state. Obviously, if you look at Victoria, big issues at the moment with large lockdowns, but they do have an underlying level of infrastructure and major projects which will, if they keep using construction as a lever for economic recovery, that's going to really underpin that market. But the lockdown is going to make it suffer and endure in the doldrums for quite a period of time. So how long that's going to be, your guess is going to be as good as mine.
Yeah.
In terms of Sydney, they're pushing along again. Strong backbone of infrastructure spending lots on schools, spending lots on hospitals. There's a pipeline of work there. Now, those pipelines of work largely existed before COVID came down, but there's been an acceleration of that spend because of COVID. I suppose the bit that nobody's really quite getting a handle on yet is how some of these major projects are going to have to change because of the not wanting to reuse the same old tired phrase, but the new normal. Like Sydney Metro, for example. Some of the stuff I've read on Sydney Metro is that those projects were all geared at a certain amount of people travelling. Will that same number of people be travelling over the next 2-3 years? At this moment in time, with the new normal and everybody saying working from home is brilliant, we're going to do more of it, you'd think no. But if we if we start recovering quicker than we anticipate, that going back to the old normal may come back quicker. So I think it's going to be a balance too. So some of those infrastructure projects are going to have to change to a certain extent, but when you're trying to fast track infrastructure now to get into shovel ready status to actually start on site, there's a lot of crystal ball gazing there to change it in time. So that balance is probably going to be skewed to a certain extent. But then when you compare it to Queensland, we're talking about the same 3-4 major projects that we've had forever and a day. The same projects that we were talking about back in November last year, which are now, like Queen's Wharf, like Cross River Rail is now started, Brisbane Metro, are still the same 3 projects we're talking about in Queensland. And they're now being flagged as the projects that are going to help us through COVID. which I look at that and I think, well, how can they be helping us through COVID when they were the projects we had in the first place? There's nothing new coming through to a certain extent. And there are a number of programs like the Building Acceleration Fund, etc., which are all geared to try and boost investment, but they're not a $4 billion infrastructure project or an $8 million precinct, $8 billion precinct, sorry. So as you can see, and I'm not even getting into Adelaide and Northern Territory and Perth, just those three between Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane, there's a different dynamic in each one. And I think because of those different dynamics, the shape of the recovery is going to be different in each. Also in Queensland, we've got state election coming up. So that's actually going to stifle government decision making over the next few months as they kind of ramp up into their election cycle. Then after the election, if there is a change of government, there's going to be a period they want to review everything, so there'll be a stifling of decision making after that. But the likelihood is it's going to be the same government coming through because of the border closures. That's won a lot of support. So the existing government is probably going to, at this moment in time, the smart money is saying they'll continue through. So there's a lot of those kind of dynamics which all play a part. And while we look at these things and we don't want politics to play a part in infrastructure decisions and investment decisions, the reality is that they do, and they will for every day, which is why all this accelerated building's happening in the first place, because it's on back of political whim and political desire. Yeah. So like I said, I could write a different paper on each state at this moment in time. Unfortunately, I don't have the bandwidth time to do that.
Fair enough. I think it would be interesting. I see that Palaszczuk hasn't decided to try and delay the election because of COVID, like a herd has over in New Zealand.
No, because this plays into her hands more than anything else. It's I think if she was to delay the election, and these are obviously my opinions, not the views of Arcadis. If she was to delay an election, and there was a second wave suddenly hit, that could have an untold impact on what the election result could be. So yeah, I think the election is going to continue as it was. But then decisions have been made, and it's the same down in Victoria as in Queensland. There are some major decision making and major projects which are actually being pushed back because they're not deemed shovel ready. So I've heard the North East Link project down in Victoria has been delayed until maybe March, April next year, and that may come back to market in a slightly different format, broken down rather than being one big project, could be several small projects. In Queensland, the City deal, which for South East Queensland, which is supposed to bring all levels of government together to accelerate investment, accelerate infrastructure spend, that's now been put off till next year because it probably doesn't suit in all fairness, the Labour government probably doesn't suit them bringing it in before the election. But that would be a catalyst to actually making projects happen. Now, the argument for that is that, it wouldn't create any shovel-ready projects, and shovel-ready projects are great for the industry as it stands now. But what happens when the shovel-ready projects that are being accelerated now finish in 12 months, 2 years' time, 3 years' time? What's the next wave of projects that are going to take over from them? And if they've not invested in that supply chain, if they're not invested in that business case over the last 6 months, the next 6 months, the next 12 months, what's the wave of projects coming on the back of it? So one thing I've suggested for Queensland is that we may actually get the double dip recovery. We start recovering and then things drop off because I think we'll run out of projects. Yeah. Like I said, we're only talking about the same 3 projects we were talking about last November, and we still don't know what the projects are to replace them. And with a focus on shovel ready, there's no. It's the pre-construction supply chain, the designers, the architects, the engineers, QS, the project managers, the business advisors. They're the ones who are going to suffer more over a longer period. So that focus on shovel ready, which is not just Queensland government, it's also every other state government, federal government as well, means that it's actually to the detriment of the longer term health of the industry, as I see it. Because it's not looking at that pipeline, it's not looking at what's next, it's only looking at over the next 6 to 12 months.
What do you think the issue is now, Matthew? I mean, taking New South Wales out of the equation because they've got a pipeline that's double, what either Victoria or Melbourne have. And I was on a boardroom call with Rod Staples last week, and they are pushing on, and with all the rail projects, all the road projects, they expect capacity to return, or even if they don't, they're carrying on anyway. Probably focusing on Queensland. In the past, there's been an aversion to new projects on the basis that we don't have the cash to spend. You don't have the cash to spend.
And now that's the issue as well. That is also part of the issue. Yeah.
Absolutely, but it's been proven, it's been proven that it's possible. I'll reserve judgment on how successful they have been. But in terms of asset recycling, there's money available through that. You've got Scott Morrison coming out and saying, you guys need to spend, but you need to do it responsibly. You've got people like IFM partners publicly announcing to the market, we have $160 billion. To spend. We're looking for projects. We're looking to create projects. We're active in the market. So, is that money argument still there from the Queensland government's point of view, or should they be more creative and actually start thinking about doing something different?
Yeah. So absolutely is the bottom line. They should be looking at doing something different. I think, and I was listening to John Davis on your podcast. And we've had this conversation with John plenty of times, is that the current government 4 years ago, or however long it was, locked themselves into this cycle in terms of one of their previous campaigns, where they accused the opposition of selling Queensland assets, and so we're not going to do that. So they've kind of pushed themselves into their own corner to a certain extent by saying we're not going to sell any Queensland. Now, I think if you went round to most taxpayers in Queensland and you said, you happy to own this asset here, they'd probably look at it and go, no. But it's this kind of mentality that they built up through a political promise. So that asset research, if you look at New South Wales, just going back to New South Wales for a second, there's a reason they've got this pipeline of work, and it's all through asset recycling. It's getting rid of assets that don't cut the mustard anymore. They're not meeting requirements from a taxpayer perspective. Sell it on and create a new asset that is then owned by the public. That's the way to do it. Finding different ways of funding these projects and coming up with different models is exactly the way to be doing it. But government have to take the lead on it, particularly in the current market with COVID-19. We're just doing a client paper at the moment, and a lot of clients, particularly from the big REITs, etc., they've all pulled back on their development pipeline. There's only one or two that are actually pushing forward, and the ones who are pushing forward are probably ones who've got a build program of 3 or 4 years and think, well, by the time we've built this, we're the only show in town when the market comes back. Whether that's commercial office or whether that's residential or industrial. Some sectors seem to be pushing forward anyway, like industrial, like data centers in particular. But you look at some sectors and you look at some of the big developers. They've said, well, we were going to move this project forward, we've now mothballed it. We're going to sit on it for 12 months. We're going to do this instead. We're going to do minor upgrades, minor changes instead.
Yeah.
So the private sector's all dropped back, which means it's all being led by government. And if government don't find new and innovative ways to drive investment forward and to create cash through a mechanism like asset recycling, then we're not going to be moving forward. And there's a reason why we're still talking about the same 3 or 4 projects. The treasurer for Queensland government actually pointed out some projects where Queensland is attracting massive investment, but he pointed to 2 developments that were private sector led. So you can't really point to a private sector led and almost get the kudos from that, as if say, it's happening because of us. It's not. There's a development approval. It's not necessarily you, government, driving that change and driving that legacy. So there's got to be a real shift between what private, in terms of what the public sector is doing.
And what about resources in Queensland? I mean, what's going on there? I mean, we had a fantastic boom in terms of LNG gas and what have you a few years back, and I certainly did very well in that area and learnt an awful lot about new industries and technologies and what have you. But all of that's very much steady now, isn't it? It's all operations and maintenance. At Adani, we're going to build their mine, but that now seems to be sort of very much not happening from what I can tell, or I actually don't know.
I'm not across Adani. I know politically there are a lot of problems with it. That's one mine. That's not going to be a resurgence of the mining boom that we had in kind of 2011, 2012. And that kind of boom is unlikely to ever happen again, in all honesty. And I remember one of the conversations at the time, because I was still relatively new in Queensland at that point, was that why are we trying to do so much so quickly? Because it wasn't just about LNG, it wasn't just about mines, it wasn't just about the ports and all that kind of thing. It also created a lot of property interest as well in terms of residential, in terms of office towers and big relocations in CBDs, etc. But it was all now, and look at it, like 2 years later, it all fizzled out. It started in 2009, 2010, and kind of was all gone by 2012. So there's a lot of activity there that all kind of fizzled out really, really quickly. It almost like the bubble burst very, very quickly, and everything peaked too soon. So that's not going to happen again in terms of that level of activity. And what it did was it kind of threw a lot of contractors, a lot of consultants down into that side of the world. And when everything kind of fell over, a lot of them got let go, and then a lot of them couldn't get back into property or construction, either because they wanted inflated salaries, because they were being paid a king's ransom in the LNG world and the mining world. And then they kind of lost themselves to industry. They went and got other careers, went other things, or went travel, whatever. So resources has been an issue in Queensland for a while. And also when we had what was euphemistically referred to as the residential boom a couple of years later, when it's a construction boom, not a construction boom, when it's only in one sector, like it was for Queensland and residential. We built a lot of residential very, very quickly. A number of tier 3s went under because they kind of overextended themselves. And then the tier 2 contractors took up that slack, and tier 2s started moving into tier 1 space, and tier 1 contractors, because they couldn't compete with the tier 2s, and because there weren't a significant amount of projects to cater for 3 or 4 tier 1s in Queensland, a lot of them either closed their offices or just said, we're just going to focus on work down in Sydney and Melbourne. So that kind of, from a contracting perspective, kind of reduced the pool of contractors. So when you look at the pipeline of work in Queensland and where it's been, you'd have expected construction prices to be dropping. Over the last 4 or 5 years, you'd have expected them to drop. They haven't increased because we've actually had less competition to deliver a slowly diminishing pipeline of work. And then when these major projects are on, like Queen's Wharf, which is well into its build phase now, Queen's Wharf, which is starting its build, any capacity in the market, that's going to suck up, which means even in the times of COVID, we're not going to see prices dropping to the level that you think they should, because there is going to be an insufficient resource availability to deliver these projects. Back to what I said before, because of the lack of design-led projects, because of the lack of business case-led projects and the folks being on shovel ready, there's going to be plenty of architects, plenty of engineers, plenty of QSs, plenty of PMs all wanting to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And just touch on tender prices, because that's sort of quite a specific area that you talk about in your document, isn't it, in terms of what you see happening in the next sort of few years?
And again, those models are all based on where we see the pipelines working in those various states, and with the kind of factors that I just talked about in Queensland. Again, it differs in each state. So what we're seeing is generally that we don't think there's going to be any inflation this year. We think, if anything, prices are going to hold. While we have seen some panic in the market from major contractors, the trade contracting levels not actually drop. They're quite busy. It's almost happened in 2 stages, where previously, when the market's been busy, managing contractors would struggle to get trade coverage. Now, all trade contractors are more than happy to talk and have a go at a bid. Right? They're not declining tender opportunities anymore, but they're not dropping their prices yet, because they still have relatively solid, pipelines. We anticipate a lot of those pipelines are going to start coming off towards the end of this year, beginning of next year. So we're going to start seeing trade contractors, be probably a bit more commercially aggressive at the start of next year. Now, how long that continues goes back to what's the shape of the recovery and how quickly is the market going to rebound. At the moment, we're being quite optimistic that the market will recover quite quickly. So we're forecasting in each state there's going to be a level of deflation. To what level really depends on the state. That's going to impact next year, and then depending on how quickly it recovers, again, depends on the pipeline involved in each state. But if we all end up in a second lockdown, if we all end up in stage 2, like Victoria is, I'll have to redo all those numbers yet again, because it will change. But that's the whole point of trying to be dynamic with this, is trying to keep up with the events as they happen.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see you try and model when we find out that nobody's going anywhere till 2023, and see what that does. See what that does to everything.
It'll just be depressing. That's the main thing.
Yeah.
But when you compare that, I've still got a lot of colleagues in the UK, and you compare to what's happening with markets over there, and what's happening in that country, and how they're dealing with lockdown, and other countries like the US, etc. We're actually doing pretty well. And as a country, it's very easy to point the finger at government, point the finger at what's happening down in Victoria, and blame and all that kind of thing. But when you compare it to how other countries are responding to the pandemic and how we're responding, we're actually doing pretty well. There's still blood on the streets. It's still pretty bad for a lot of people, particularly if you're in the arts, particularly if you're in tourism, and to a certain extent construction. But as an economy, we're holding up relatively well. But there are a lot of commentators saying this is the recession kind of Australia needed, because just go back to when I was in the GFC and I moved over to Australia, people were talking about the GFC here. But when I looked around, I was like, this isn't like it was over there. So I think this is the new perspective, which means it's a new low for Australia to a certain extent, because they've had 25 years or however long it's been of consecutive growth. This will be a reset, and therefore people struggle with that reset. But it could be a damn sight worse when you compare it to other countries.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, the only thing I'm worried about, I'm kind of worried and kind of, well, is that's actually a bad thing, but we might end up feeling like we're in the Truman Show, cut off from the rest of the world, but we're all having a jolly good time and getting great tans and having a nice time at the beach and, Barbies and all the rest of it. So anyway, look, Matthew, thank you ever so much. Like, you've really given us some fantastic information there, and ideas and thoughts around what the industry is doing at the moment. As you know, we always finish on a positive note and ask people what they're excited about at the moment. So over to you. What are you excited about right now?
So a few things. This year I think we're actually going to hold our own to a certain extent. In terms of our business unit and the wider Arcadis business in Australia, I think we're going to do relatively solidly. Probably not as well as what we were originally planned. Mm-hmm. Anybody who done as well as they planned are probably taking JobKeeper payments. But yeah, so there's that. So I think it's about the launch into next year and what's going to come next year, particularly around industry transformation. But that industry transformation, a lot of people talk about it, but there are actually not that many people actually doing it to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think we're different, is that we've actually tried to drive a different purpose. Now, we were doing this before COVID came along, so I'm not trying to say because of COVID we've transformed how we do things. This is an initiative last June. But we've developed this client platform called Cost Clarity, which is just about improving client experience in terms of how clients receive our services, the reports that we do, the analytics, the insights, the forecasts, how they access that information more readily, how it's more interactive, rather than just getting a PDF report. And it's been 12, 13, 14 months of hard work, but it's paying off. The feedback we're getting from clients has been absolutely phenomenal. And while this is a product that we've developed in Australia, we're actually going to be deploying it to the rest of the world as kind of our platform for our business globally, for our QS cost and commercial management business.
Yeah, brilliant.
And we're continuing to develop it. So just the very fact that we can go out there and have different conversations with clients, and it's just, have you seen this? And it's not a sell. It's not about, it's not a Power BI dashboard that just has some fancy graphs on it to make, putting makeup on a pig to a certain extent to try and make everything look better. It's actually a different way of doing stuff, and the feedback and the interaction we're getting with our clients, even clients who we're not working with, we're showcasing it to clients who we'd like to work with, and their feedback has been, we're not seeing anything else like this in the market. So I know all my competitors have all talked about digital transformation. I've worked at a number of those organizations, and I have a rough idea of where they are, or at least where they were, and I do feel like we're making a step change, which is, other than giving back to the industries we talked about through the networking group, as we did at the very start. Doing something different like this and challenging the market is exactly what I wanted to do with my career.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. Weren't you saying you've actually got, is it one or two unicorns working for you that are not just quantity surveyors, but they're actually computer developers as well?
Kind of the other way around. Started off as quantity surveyors, and
Right.
decided they wanted to go and work for. They wanted to go and study to do software development.
Yeah.
So that guy we've re-employed, and he's now a software developer, but he actually understands, the QS component, and he understands the services we deliver. So, if we wanted to develop this traditionally, which would be going out to an external company to develop this for software companies to develop this for us, we'd have to explain to them what our issues are, what our clients' issues are, and expect them to try and understand that. But unless you've worked in the industry, unless you've done our job and interacted with clients, nobody can really understand what those issues are like and what the challenges are that we're trying to overcome. Whereas the guy we've got, he kind of ticks both boxes. So yeah, I constantly refer to him as a unicorn. And when he sees this, he's going to be horrified that I've done it.
What's he called? Can you give him a shout out? Or
yeah, a shout out to Josh Stevenson, the unicorn at Arcadis.
Fantastic. Cost Clarity's got a website as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, so the portal is an online platform. And, I think we were talking about the other day in terms of like, when you think about apps, when you think about videos online, you think about YouTube. When you think about professional networking online, you think about LinkedIn. When we think about what we want Cost Clarity to be, is that when you think about quantity surveying, you think about Cost Clarity and that kind of online app, that online platform that you go to make sense out of the stuff that we try and advise our clients.
Yeah. And can people go and have a look at that now? Is there information?
Go look at it. There's a page in there for just with a quick video just to show what it is. You can't access any of the information until you've registered and until we've linked you with stuff, which at this moment in time we're obviously limiting to clients. But if people want to go and have a quick look at what's already there, then it's www.cost-clarity.com.
Brilliant. Fantastic. There you go. Plug as well. Matthew, thank you again. I've really enjoyed that. It's so good to talk about the opportunities, the threats, the changing market, the dynamics that are going on, and you've given us some great information. So thank you very much for your time today.
No problem. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
All right. Great. We'll hopefully get a chance to talk to you soon again.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Integrated Infrastructure is powered by North Search, specialists in executive and technical search across engineering, design, construction, property and energy markets in Australia. If you'd like to find out more about North Search or get involved with this podcast, you can click on the links in the show notes or email me directly at the address on the screen. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Integrated Infrastructure. Please tell your friends and colleagues if you did, and we hope to see you again soon.